Hello, hello, and welcome to this amazing panel organized by the Rwandan American Friends. This special program is brought to you in conjunction with the University of Rwanda and Cape State University, where we're going to be discussing specifically experiences that Kent State University students have had in their visits to Rwanda. We're very excited that you've tuned in today, wherever you happen to be. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And we hope this engaging discussion can offer just a glimpse of of what Rwanda has to offer. So right before we jump in here, just a quick introduction. My name is Didier Bizimungu at Rwanda. I'm living in Florida, right around the St. Petersburg area. And in a few seconds here, we're going to introduce our panelists here who so graciously have joined us today. To kick things off, if we can, we'd like to start with an introduction by Peter Mugume, coming at you live here from Rwanda.
Okay. Thank you so much, moderator. I'm Peter Mugume, a lecturer at the Center for Conflict Management from the University of Rwanda. Happy to be with you.
Thank you, Peter, and we're very glad to have you. Next up, if we can, Professor Sarah.
Thank you, Didier. My name is Sarah Schmidt. I'm a professor of peace and conflict studies at Kent State University.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're glad to have you. Mariah, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Didier. I am Mariah Fannin, and I am a Kent State student studying secondary social studies education.
Thank you, Mariah. We're very glad to have you and welcome. Kelly Rose, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Didier. My name is Kelly Rose Kordnak. I'm a Kent State University student studying both Arabic translation and history.
Amazing. So as you can hear, we have a very interesting group here, a very interesting mix. So this is going to be an engaging discussion. Right off the bat, let's jump in. You guys have been in Rwanda for a few weeks now. If we can start with Sarah, if you can please tell us about your experiences thus far in Rwanda.
Yes, so this course was designed to give students on-the-ground experience learning about the reconciliation process that Rwanda has so successfully given us an example for. The course is through the School of Peace and Conflict Studies at Kent State University. And so the goal was to give students a multi-sector view of the peace building process. So we had the chance to visit government ministries as well as civil society, as well as the education sector with our strong partnership with the University of Rwanda.
That's amazing. I love that aspect of actually going to that place instead of maybe just sitting in a classroom and heading out and seeing for yourself exactly what things look like when it comes to that process. What about you, Kelly Rose? Can you give us sort of the student view of the program and of Rwanda thus far?
Yes, so this is my first summer studying abroad or traveling or so. It has been an amazing experience so far. I think my favorite thing is just being able to interact with the people and see the landscape for myself instead of studying in the classroom, as you said.
Mhm.
And yeah, being able to see our studies in action and then be able to bring that back to the US so that we can use that within our careers.
Excellent. And was this the first time in Rwanda or in Africa, I should say?
Yes, I previously visited Europe last month, but this is my first time in Africa. I loved it.
That's awesome. That's interesting. And then if you can, please, Sarah, if you can give us your perspective. I'm
Yes,
sorry, not
so-
Sarah. My apologies, Mariah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been amazing an experience being here. From a historical perspective, I really enjoy hearing the perspectives of the Rwandan people. We visited all these ministries and government offices, as well as a small village, a small reconciliation village, where we got to hear the perceptions and stories of people who actually lived through the genocide of the Tutsis in 1994. And so that was just really impactful. And I think it is just different than reading about it in a book. Much different.
I can imagine, straight from the horse's mouth.
Mhm.
And sorry, my apologies that we only just recently met as well. So if there's there are any mistakes there with names, I truly do apologize. So let's dive into maybe some interesting experiences besides kind of like looking at the ministries. I know coming from, I was recently there in Ghana myself, just a super, super long flight. Was there anything that surprised you about Ghana upon your arrival? And we can start with Sarah if you prefer.
Sure. So this is my third time to Rwanda and maybe my sixth time to Africa. So I feel like I was maybe anticipating the local environment. It feels a little bit like a return to home after cultivating friendships and professional and personal relationships here in Rwanda. So it felt a little bit more like a homecoming for me. I always, though, love to watch the reactions of my students as they experience an entirely new environment, and navigating those cultural differences and language barriers, and the good and the difficult and everything in between. So that's always good for me to see and better prepare for the next group of students to come.
That's amazing. I do love that almost experience by proxy. Just seeing the
Right.
surprising looks and the reactions that you get from people's first times. What about you, Mariah? Anything kind of like surprising, shocking, or anything like that, good or bad?
Yeah, right. So I think the very first thing, the very first day was the weather. So, I anticipated we are 2 degrees away from the equator.
Right.
I anticipated it to be hot and sunny and, just like, the American perception of Africa is that it's always hot and dry, right? So the weather here is so cool and mild
Yep.
and it's windy.
The
And,
wind.
we stood on many rooftops while we were here. It was beautiful. So I think that's like the number one thing that surprised me the most.
I would 100% agree with you, especially that nice wind that is literally, I feel like, everywhere.
Yeah.
And then I didn't forget you as well. What about you, Kidda Rose?
I think one of the first things that surprised me was, as Sarah said, this feeling of home. And when we first met the Rwandan people, they were all so welcoming. And I remember Pacifique coming up to us with the University of Rwanda students and all giving us hugs and like welcoming us home. And that was one thing that continued throughout our stay, was that everybody reminded us that we were home, and it's such a peaceful environment. It's probably one of the most peaceful places I've ever been.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's one of the feelings you definitely get. So what was interesting when I got the prep information here, I saw one of the places that you guys visited was the Rwanda National Police, and I couldn't think, that's one of the biggest things that I want to visit. Let's say if you want to, explore a country, so it kind of struck out to me. So what did you think, Kelly Rose, about the RNP?
So this is actually one of my favorite places we visited, particularly because I'm interested in human trafficking issues, and I work in multiple coalitions and committees and such on campus and within the community. So I wanted to see the Rwandan perspective on these issues. And one thing that they kept reiterating is that they have systems in place for victim advocacy, and when something happens to a victim, they don't focus on just the physical needs, but rather the psychological and emotional needs as well. And they really try to work within the community through events and different learning sessions. And they teach the community members ahead of time before these things happen. And there's this general awareness within the community to watch out for each other. So.
And that's so key. Not only taking care of what is the emergency now, how can we solve it, but what happens afterwards, that mental mind state. And this goes out to everyone, whoever I've noticed. Did you notice anything written on the big, huge buses on the back of their windows, potentially, on the same subject with the police?
Yeah. Yeah, and they have all the emergency numbers
Yeah.
written. And yeah, so I loved that actually. I was like, wow, look, everybody can just see it. Even
Mhm.
tourists, because those are the types of things that as a tourist you find hard to find. If
Yep.
you are in an emergency, you need to have those numbers written down somewhere. But here, if you're on the side of the street lost,
Hmm.
you can just like call, a bus goes by and you're like, oh, okay.
Now I know where to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that struck out to me when I first came back as well. It's just how readily available that kind of information is. If you didn't know here in the US that 911 is a thing, I don't know how you'd have to learn, unless you're my mother. Whenever she travels anywhere, she does all the research, all the Wikipedias, all the Googles. Now, what's really interesting is a lot of the development, a lot of some of the tourist stuff, for example, some of the development that happens is usually happening in conjunction with the Rwanda Development Board. So I was interested to see. One, I think, Sarah, your input might be extremely valuable here just to see because you have a lot of reference points when it comes to Africa. But then I also gave it to one of the students there to see just even visiting some of the information that they might have given you.
Yeah. Yeah, the Rwanda Development Board was really an essential site visit for us to give us the economic development perspective to the peace building process. And really the progress that has been made over the last few decades is incredible. I can compare this to my other travels in the region, and it's really difficult to even draw any kind of comparison between Rwanda and other nations in the region that I've had experiences in. Everything from poverty reduction plans to private sector development and the responsible, the social responsibility and the role of, taking care of people at the center of the development plans. I just really have a deep appreciation for the overall approach of development in this country. It really does center the people, and it centers the oneness and the peace building process among all of these other factors of private sector and centralized development and marginalized communities or vulnerable people in the country. We heard this from multiple sectors, but it's heartening to see that in a more economic sector, because I think we have a contrasting view of that from the United States perspective, where private industry doesn't always center people.
Right. And the biggest things too is about those things, right? As in the transparency behind that, knowing about these programs, having this information be released to the public, so that they can act as a part of this process versus just, some government or agency somewhere where you kind of have no idea where some things are going on. You see budgets going to it, but nothing ever materializes. I feel like that's a huge component of it. Not only those services and being able to put them forward, but also communicating to the public and letting them know transparently, this is what's going on, these are the goals, this is where your tax monies are going to. I feel like was a huge component of that. What about you, Kiddo Rose? What was your perception of RDB?
I think one of the things that stood out to me was especially when they highlighted the statistics and showed us the data behind what they were talking about, especially where Rwanda stands as, I can't remember the exact, it was the second
easiest to do business with.
Yes,
Yes.
second easiest to do business with in Africa, and among the top 30 in the world. Yeah. So that was it was really important for me to see that. And especially doing research coming here. I mean, Rwanda is like one of the top safest countries in the world as well, which contradicts what most people think about Rwanda. So yeah.
That's perfect. You actually just smoothly moved on to what I was gonna dive into next year. And this is completely understandable, and it goes for a lot of different places in the world where there is a difference between the actual experience of it and then also like the perception, right?
Mhm.
And those two things sometimes clash, especially if you think about, the history, the genocide against the Tutsi being such a frontal mind and concern to a lot of the world when it comes to, a beautiful but tiny country. And so it's understandable that that's one of the things that may for potentially shape your perception. Mariah, between maybe the research that you did yourself, or maybe even some of the discussions that you may have had with other students, or even just just looking things on online, how did that differ versus your experience of being in the actual country itself?
Right. Well, so I didn't really know too much about Rwanda before I came here. I did do like, some research about the history, but I never had a perception of whether or not it was dangerous or not,
Mm-hmm.
in all honesty. I know that the perception of those around me, when I told them that I was going to Rwanda, they would be like,
Mm-hmm.
where is that? And I'd be like, well, it's in Africa. And everybody, I had a next door neighbor, she like gripped the fence. She was like, Africa? And and I was like, yeah, it's gonna be fine. And everybody told me to be safe. But then I come here and
Mm-hmm.
there are, there's national police on almost every block. And then, but you can tell that people aren't threatened.
Right.
They stand next to them, they talk, they smile, they chat. The other day I went to the mall and some
Mm-hmm.
guy just got up and left his laptop and all of his stuff on the table and just
It
went to
was
the
still there.
bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he expected it to still be there when he got back.
Mm-hmm.
So like it being safe is just like a given almost.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels safe. It feels peaceful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's one of the things with those police being everywhere. Honestly, the biggest things I use for them is asking for directions when I'm there with the twists and turns and the roads everywhere they are. But that's amazing to kind of have that, differentiation between maybe some research and some knowledge. It could even be, the entire continent of Africa itself versus actually being there amongst the people. So something I thought maybe potentially might be interesting there, and I think you kind of touched upon that, Mariah. um, Kairos, can you tell us maybe what was your perception? Did you already go into the class already knowing that you're gonna go to Rwanda, or how did you feel slash what were your feelings before and then after arriving?
Yeah, so actually, we never really learned about Rwanda or much about Africa, just in our schooling system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the reason why Rwanda was kind of in the front of my mind ever since high school was because I took a confronting genocide class. Actually, one of my
Mm-hmm.
history teachers had prepared, and I think that really sparked an interest in not only genocidal and peace and conflict studies, but
Mm-hmm.
Rwanda itself. I was always curious about the country. But I think I really wish that we had all learned about different countries within the continent of Africa, because I feel like that's something that's often missed in the education system. But now I definitely have an interest for it, along with the Middle East and other Asian countries in that continent as well.
That's amazing. So it's ignited like a spark to find out more and
Yeah.
dig a little bit deeper. I
Mhm.
will say, growing up there in Rwanda, I know 54 countries. I know so many capitals that are unnecessary at this point in time, but I'm glad we kind of touched upon that geographic outlook a little bit more. And this says to Sarah, with your experience, different countries that you've explored, places that I'm sure you've taken other students as well. How does Rwanda kind of compare when it comes to safety with some of the other places that you've been?
We always follow the kind of the standard protocol with safety and security. So there's certain things that across the board we would cover certain material with students that are taking a trip abroad. But just personally leading these types of trips, of course, I know a bit more of what to anticipate when we get to the country. And so having been to Rwanda before, and knowing what to expect when we're navigating the city and interacting with people, I certainly can say that the concern for safety and security of the group is very low. It's really not something that's at the forefront of my mind. I worry so much more about things like language barriers or just the normal cultural nuances that that can, be difficult to manage sometimes. Those are the things that tend to be at the forefront of my mind. Certainly not safety and security when I'm here with students.
Excellent. So you're a pro. You're just like, I'm just going to navigate everything. I've got this down. I just got to take care of how to interact with different cultures. I love that.
Well, it's funny. It's to the point where my 7-year-old daughter is here in the country with me, and
Oh, wow.
even with my child by my side for many of the experiences, it's just not something that I have concern about, and that's spoken from experience, right? I wouldn't feel that secure unless I had been here prior and felt the hospitality and the security that's present.
Perfect. I love that. And I'm hoping that she's or he's having an amazing time.
Absolutely.
So let's say, Mariah, now that you've been here, you're now officially a Rwandan ambassador. When others ask you, hey, I heard you were going to Africa. How did it go? How would you tell them about Rwanda, basically? Like, what kind of words would you use?
I would actually start with, it's nothing like you think it is.
Yeah,
that's probably what I would start with. And then I would start with like Kigali, and I would tell them that the city just never sleeps.
That's
It's
true.
always awake, and everybody walks everywhere. And then, so I would also use words like sustainable and hospitable,
Wow.
and definitely safe, and probably maybe friendly.
Yeah.
Maybe that goes with hospitable, but like everybody on a personal level, there's like a general level of hospitality that like everybody is welcome here. You're safe here. It's okay. And then there's like on a personal level where everybody says good morning and everybody waves or everybody says good night. We live in we've been staying in a compound where there are lots of visitors all the time, and everybody is just so friendly and says good morning and will, help you put fruit on your plate. So
I love that. Again, so it's a huge responsibility. So thank you for that. And yeah, that's one of the biggest things that you notice. Not only the friendliness, but also everyone walking everywhere, which is amazing with how many hills you have. So you better be ready with your cardio. What about you, Kelly Rose?
So I would actually say that Rwanda embodies a lot of the aspects of what an ideal country that I think would be, just because of many factors. But of course, its landscape, it is such a beautiful country for real. Like the sunsets and the sunrises are insane when you wake up really early in the morning. That and the sense of oneness within the people. We've seen that multiple times, but they're focused on human rights, on unity, on and just along with that, keeping the traditions of Africa alive within the country, even though it's going through a lot of development and a lot of process and improvement. It's managed to keep a lot of its traditions along with its people and hold on to those. So yeah, Rwanda is just a beautiful country. I want to stay here.
That definitely explains why every time I come for 2 weeks, it turns into 2 months. So, so I think you touched upon something there too. So huge focus in terms of that development has been gender equality and women's empowerment, right? Because we don't want to just advance and move things forward just as we have always have done. Instead, we want to make sure that everyone benefits the same from this development that we've been discussing. And I'm gonna shoot this over to Sarah there, and I'm totally promise I'm not picking on you. I'm just using kind of your perspective amongst other different countries to kind of see how it compares. How was your experience with that? Was that something that you saw on the ground actually happening? Do you have any examples that you can potentially give us to that regard?
Yes, so I'm going to go back to the Rwanda National Police on this one. Of course, we know the statistics and we see the gender parity really across the board. I work in education, so I tend to focus on the education sector, and Rwanda is really a beacon in the region for gender parity in education, but also in leadership. We see this, and so we see the numbers and everything, but then we go to site visits like the Rwanda National Police, and we arrive, and there's bottles of water, and there's a nice conference room. We're all taking our seats, and the police are across, and we're here, all getting settled. And then it's time for the official meeting to take place, and there's an empty seat at the head of the table, and it's kind of obvious that we're waiting for the head person to arrive to begin, right? And then that person walks into the room, and everyone stands, and I turn, and it's a woman.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And from a statistical standpoint, this isn't surprising because we see the numbers, right? But being in this space and beyond that, a space of the police force, which traditionally would be a male-dominated sector, and here at the head of the table, leading this conversation, is a woman, and I just so deeply appreciate that, and it was quite the very pleasant surprise to stand and turn and be greeted by the head of police, who is a woman.
I love that. And not only seeing and hearing the statistics, but actually seeing it in person. And that representation is just so important. What about you, Mariah Kirills? Like any kind of examples that you noticed? Maybe it was the exact same experience that Sarah just mentioned.
Yeah, so all across the board, we see people working in Rwanda, and a lot of them are women and a lot of them are men. And I've noticed that, like, specifically. There's a very good mixture of people working in each job that is both women and men. Though through my personal experiences and what I've seen on the ground, there are still societal gender roles taking place, which, I mean, it's not a negative thing, but the society hasn't quite gotten to the point where both men and women do housekeeping and both men and women clean after each other. Like, it hasn't gotten quite there yet.
We definitely have work to do. And that's true across the board. But I think just even beginning with leadership roles, right? In those higher areas, and seeing, separated people out that are doing things that you typically wouldn't expect. I think that's a great starting point that kind of starts planting that seed that maybe those societal limits that we have, shouldn't exist, or at least we should start working to get rid of them, because the reality, the actuality is completely different. So this is kind of a heavier question. I will preface that. Let's start with Kelly Rose. So how does the concepts that you've learned in the wonderful Sarah's class kind of meet in terms of the actuality, in terms of actually living and going to a place that embodies some of the things that you've been studying?
So I have been studying some conflict management and peace concepts beforehand. But it's really nice to see it in person, and not only that, but have a Rwandan perspective on those instead of just the American examples that we have learned in class before. I think it speaks volumes to learn a whole different society and to be immersed in a whole different culture, and then see the government officials implement some of these concepts, and to keep everyone on the same page in those aspects, and to make it at the forefront of the sense of development that everybody wants to improve the country, and to make it what their goals are in 10, 20, 30 years, to keep everyone on the same page, and to make those values known throughout, because it is very prevalent throughout all the people in Rwanda that we've met so far, and we've met quite a few. Yeah.
That's great. So it's been a busy 2 weeks. What about you, Mariah? How do those things kind of marry up with each other?
So throughout our time here, we went to ministries first. We got an overview of history, then we began to go to ministries. We asked questions of officials, right? But from an American perspective, we always hear the talk and we don't ever see the action. But as we heard the talk from the ministries here, we also began to notice the action on the ground as we interacted with the city. And then we went to the reconciliation village and really saw these peace building skills being used to mend these relationships and help heal these people on a grassroots level. So I think that seeing not only, or well, hearing the talk and seeing the action was really, really important and really impactful.
That's amazing. So Sarah mentioned something earlier that kind of still sticks out to me in living vicariously through your students, right? Like seeing the experiences that they're having, especially if it's their first time visiting somewhere that far. So my question here is to Dr. Mugume, and don't worry, I promise I didn't forget about you. What about yourself? Is there anything that you noticed in this wonderful folks from KSU in your experiences introducing them to Rwanda and so on and so forth?
Okay, thank you so much. What I experienced is, I mean, the willingness to learn. First of all, they came with a main purpose to learn, but we're talking about reconciliation. But from the perspective of the institutions, at least to the Rwanda National Police, where I managed to go with them, I really liked the way they were asking questions, and questions in relation to what they have experienced in the US. Actually, they were like, okay, here is the experience we have from home. Based on what we've heard from our hosts here, some of them actually seem to be surprised, particularly when it comes to how, for example, police works or interacts with the community members. But how comes that the police works with people? So they notice a kind of difference in terms of, I think the people, I mean, the community members versus the security organs, specifically the police. And they were they appeared to be very much surprised. And we're wondering how can they, I mean, you know, how normally we fear police. When I meet a police officer, I'm like, there's a problem. Which is unlike Rwanda, where actually when someone sees a police officer, it's very fine. So that is what I noticed at least. Yeah.
That's great. So you'd give them an F then. Just kidding. You sound exactly like my little brothers. We left when they were a lot younger than I. And so one of the first questions that I always get is, but it's not like that in the US. What do you mean? Like, how does that work? So it's always good to see that curiosity. And thank you for being with them with the RMP. Again, always treating visitors and keeping in mind with that culture preference when it comes to making sure that people feel at home. Now, we've talked about contrasts, different experiences, what surprised you. What about similarities? What are some things, all right, that you might have noticed that are similar between Rwanda and the US?
Oh, I don't have like specific things that are like really similar, but I do think that like I didn't really experience too much of a culture shock coming here.
Nice.
Like I think a lot of the ways that we live and the ways that we operate are very similar. I would say that the biggest thing that's not as similar is our concepts of time.
Oh, yes.
So our concepts of time are very different. So like, we've had to have our patients, we've had our patients like tested, but we're practicing, and we've gotten through it. But, I was actually surprised that I didn't experience a big culture shock here. And I do think it's because our cultures are actually quite similar.
That's amazing. I'm learning all kinds of new learnings today. 100% agree with you on the timing thing. That is something I have to readjust to. I'm used to my whole American, just always ongoing, and that is not the case. So, which is nice, actually. I think that's part of the reason why I end up staying so long is that it puts me in a different mindset. It almost like relaxes me. So although in the beginning I'm like, oh, I can't believe this. Towards the end there, I'm like, okay, all right, this is a lot nice. What about you, Katie Rose? Any like similarities that you notice? This could be culture, systems, and so on.
I actually so based on traveling, I think this was more of a culture shock than Europe was in particular, just for me. But there were many similarities, even though like there aren't specific values or certain actions that I would pick out. Some of the differences, I would say, I'm obviously like pricing and stuff, but some of the little things. But I think it would depend on like if anybody else would have an experience here. It would depend on where you were staying. So we mostly stayed in the city, the capital of Kigali. But if we were to stay in one of the more rural areas, of course, that would be a different experience. So we had most of the stuff that we needed all the time because we were always on the move and because we were always visiting people. So I think it would be a different experience depending on where you stayed. But I think this sense of friendliness and this open arms, welcoming experience really just made everything seem okay. And I don't think we had a hard time really with anything coming here.
Thank you. That is a huge thing with that pricing thing. That could be enjoyable or can be a little challenging. I know I love it. My mother does not, however. She's back living there, and that's one of her challenges. She's just like, just tell me. But back to the program, Dr. Mugume, if you can, what has been the overall experience thus far with this conjunction between the two universities, and maybe your expectations going in, and thus far your experience a little bit with the actuality?
Okay, thank you so much. I think what I can see, first of all, is the commitment between our two institutions. The University of Rwanda, particularly through the Center for Conflict Management, I mean, is committed to working with the Kent State University. I mean, this encounter or the meeting with the Kent State University team here, it started, I think, in 2018. But reaching here is a result of the commitment between two institutions. So the commitment in terms of the willingness to share the experience, particularly looking at the reconciliation or post-conflict reconstruction process in Rwanda, the curiosity from the Kent State University, and our curiosity also to share the experiences. We want our students to interact, for example. As students, although I'm a professor teaching, but as I'm a student anyway, I would love to, our students from here, based on our context, interacting with students from this global West, or the Western countries, or most of the developed countries, to see how they talk about the academic concept, to share the experience from classrooms. So sharing this experience is something that is enhancing our understanding of each other. The culture, the diversity, the methodology, particularly, which I very much appreciated. Yesterday we had this very interesting symposium, the way we call it, where they came as a team, but when they reached here, they also formed different teams. So looking at the presentations with Rwandan students and the Kent State University students, they shared this amazing experience when it comes, for example, to the conflicts. And as a university, University of Rwanda, we teach, we do research, but we also do community outreach. So I was very much appreciating when the team chose to visit a rural area. I wouldn't have been happy if the team left without visiting a rural area. The community outreach part, it's important for them to share, to share with us. So they were sharing their experiences, but it was so amazing. They're appreciating each other. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to join us, our students, but they are very appreciative. They were also learning. They are saying, much as we are Rwandese, we come from rural areas, but we're also sharing. So from University of Rwanda's perspective, I think this partnership is valuable. Very important, because it has enlightened some of our students about what they're expecting, They had expectations, but looking at what they were talking about yesterday, they were like, okay, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to this point of learning by seeing, by observing. This was good. So they were unlike, I think they interacted. So I liked the way they presented and the way they were sharing their experience. But this is out of the commitment between our two institutions. And we are looking forward to cooperating more on this and sharing our experience with them. So,
Perfect.
thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Magume. I think, and I just recently learned about the program myself here this week. Just connecting the youth in such a manner, giving them the opportunity to take those concepts that they're learning and putting them to action in person and seeing it live with another group of people together, I think is just an amazing concept. I think we're just now beginning to see the benefits that are going to come out from this program. But one of the things that you mentioned with that you ended there is a perfect transition into what do you hope to see in the future? And this is just for my own purely interest, and I do apologize, it might have not been in the preparation questions, but are the Rwandan students headed to the US as well to kind of see kind of almost like an exchange for themselves? Is that part of the program, or are there any other kind of conjunctions, follow-up programs incoming, basically?
Okay. Thank you. I think we are still working on that. This is, that point is a work in progress. In terms of students exchange, we are still looking into that, but that is where we want to be. We want the Kent students have been here, but we also want to send our students to Kent, to the US to learn some things, the experience, to share their experience with the Kent State University students. So it is still under discussion, but we are hoping we'll be successful on this front. So this is what we are really looking forward to doing, to achieving. That is one aspect, but that's in addition to other expectations or other things that are in pipeline. Apart from this students exchange, we're also planning to exchange the teachers or lecturers. Another front. And apart from that, we're also planning to work together in terms of research. As academic institutions, we want to promote research together, where we will be, for example, we are planning to have a conference next year to do with the peace education.
Wow.
There are different things that we are still trying to finalize when it comes to discussions. But looking at the developments so far, we are really hopeful that we will achieve a lot of partnership. Excellent.
And I do apologize. That's just my regular nature. One of my old professors used to say, and what next? So that's something that I always follow up to. What about you, Sarah? What do you see coming from this program? And most importantly, are there like any next steps or anything else that you'd like to see blossom from this experience?
Yeah, certainly. So I think at the foundation of the institutional partnership, really at every level, is the commitment to reciprocity between the different units. So I, in a different role at Kent State, am an administrator, and so I've had the opportunity to be in the institutional meetings where we're talking, contract things and the official legal side of partnerships. And there's reciprocity there. Everyone is committed to making this work. But I also, in my teaching role, get to see all the way down to the student level, where the design of this program was meant to facilitate spaces of shared learning between the University of Rwanda students and the Kent State University students. So there were disciplinary subgroups as part of this program, but it was a mixture of students from the two institutions. And so it was designed that way to have all of these different levels of learning happening. You're learning from your peers inside of those subgroups, but we're learning from experts from the University of Rwanda and also the different site visits. And then we're learning from each other from these different academic perspectives And so that reciprocity, we can see it all the way through this partnership. And in terms of future plans, this is my second time in country with students from Ohio. This is envisioned to continue on an annual basis, and beyond that, everyone is committed to put more of the structural resources around this program. There's an envisioned summer institute that will come to fruition as early as next summer. And so there's really commitment across the board to that reciprocity, which is really refreshing to see that, we talk about what the vision is, what the goal is, but then we actually go and do those things. And here we are with the second group of students making it happen. So everything from the curricular to the programmatic to the institutional, this will definitely move forward.
Excellent. I love the sound of that. And again, that's just me wanting to know, what else. Maybe there's another one of these panels next year with a different group. It's just amazing to hear that interaction is ongoing, and it's something that both institutions are committed to for the foreseeable future. And then from that, there's also, of course, that other segment or viewpoint of the actual students themselves. So starting with Kelly Rose, what do you see just from your takeaways here from this experience? How do you see kind of building this experience into not necessarily maybe even just your educational ventures, but just in your life period?
I actually wanted to touch on the aspect of the University of Rwanda students first, and then I'll go into that. But basically, I think the interaction with the University of Rwanda students what made up half of this trip. I feel like without that, we would have been missing a big part of the importance of this trip, because in our initial meeting with them, I remember we were talking about all our interdisciplinary fields, and these are some of the most intelligent colleagues I've ever had, even like at our own level or just above us, just a few years above us within their own disciplines. I feel like the way that the education system here has incorporated these peace and conflict management skills into their students is very, very important. And I feel like they would contribute a lot if they were to travel to the US and study there, which most of them have expressed interest in doing. And so, even being able to just go out on the town with them and experience Kigali and Rwanda in general was amazing. It was just a whole nother experience. But I plan on taking a lot of what I learned here and implementing that. I'm interested in doing both translation, so I'm interested in language and culture, so this fits in perfectly, and communication with people, anybody in general. But also working within anti-human trafficking organizations, and really focusing on human rights, which I feel like we've learned about even on a government level here, and the importance of that in everyday life. So.
Thank you. I think we discovered a nugget of gold here that I may have glossed over. Just that direct experience with Rwandan students, and there might be potentially that we're missing the representative there. But I definitely want to give time and consideration to just talk about how those interactions went. So Mariah, if you can share your experience thus far with that, connection and seeing, how other students learn and what their thoughts, feelings, hopes, and educational ventures look like.
Yeah. So from a personal point of view, I think the interaction with these students has been critical to this entire trip. It's changed the whole thing. They took us out for a night on the town in Kigali, and that was an amazing experience. They helped us navigate the markets. They translated for us. They did all kinds of things that we just could not have done without them. It kind of let our instructor, Sarah, and Pacifique kind of take a step back and allow us to just be free and have experiences with, colleagues. So it was just a great experience altogether. These, like Kelly Rose said, these people are so incredibly intelligent, and they gave us such insight into the way the Rwandan school system works. So as an educator, I learned so much. they have introduced me to new curriculum objectives that involve peace building. And I didn't realize that that is something that like I needed and I was missing in my own lesson planning. So, and I was also given like resources that they use to create their own lesson plans for their classrooms. And on top of that, I was introduced to a colleague named Jumbo Honore, and he is actually going to be a high school history and geography teacher.
Wow.
So so we are actually in close contact, and I fully anticipate our classrooms being connected in the future because, you know, studies have shown that when you introduce your students to a multicultural experience and multicultural activities, it actually reduces bias and prejudice in the future, which is something that's important to me and important for the United States as a whole, I think. So I've actually already talked to him about maybe connecting our classrooms and doing activities or maybe pen pals in the future.
That's amazing. We definitely did stumble on the nugget of gold there. Specifically, having that connection, connecting it with specific individuals. Not only that, but also learning from each other. That's almost exactly what you'd want to see. Dr. Mugume, I don't know if you can tell us a little bit more. Did you receive any feedback from the Rwandan students themselves, since we don't have a representative that can kind of help us see what their viewpoint was?
Their viewpoint, I mean, they very much appreciated. I mean, their interaction with the visiting students from Kent State University. I mean, talking with them or even listening to their presentations, they are very much appreciated because they are saying we have learned a lot, much as I mean our visitors have learned, but they are saying they didn't know that they are going to learn except the experience from the other side. But based on their interaction and working together in terms of preparation of the work, which they did, and the discussions, I think, in areas they visited, we are really very much appreciative. And they mentioned to us that, oh, we have learned also. They came for study tour, but we have also learned a lot. Actually, they were saying this, they wished this can be encouraged across the university. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Thank you. And 2 weeks is definitely not enough time to experience everything. It must have been just kind of whirlwind, just jumping from one place to the next. It must have felt, yeah. But I'm really glad to hear that you also got a chance to check out Kigali a little bit more, besides just kind of like the official sites and head out. I know especially the market must have been enlightening with how many interactions there are there. So as soon as you touched upon it, kind of reminded me of something. So one thing that markets or anywhere where there's business, where there's going to be quite a few people that you notice, you start noticing how people interact with each other, right? How do they respond? You know, how do the marketers selling their wares, how do they approach you? And so there's been some discussions, let's say, especially with some as our country is Rwanda is a bit of a closed off society. So I thought maybe I would ask when you did have that trip to the market, you know, how did the business folks seem like? What about the interactions that you had? Maybe even some haggling that you might have done, which is always fun. I thought maybe Kelly Rose can get us started there.
Yeah, so we actually visited an artist market. So they sold a lot of crafts and arts and paintings and those kinds of things. The first time we went there multiple times because it was so beautiful, all the crafts. But the first time we went there, I was glad we went with the University of Rwanda students. One for translation, but also to bargain prices, to show us all the different things that we could be looking for, especially for gifts for those at home. But just seeing the people on a different level, going into a community and just interacting with people, we did stand out a little bit. Like they knew we were Americans, but it was nice to have that experience and to talk with people one-on-one and to have that personalization to some of the values and concepts we've learned about. and to like see the importance in the products that they were selling and like what that meant to them was very interesting.
Excellent. So follow-up question to that, and I think Mariah is going to be glad that I asked you first here. Any Rwandan words that you may have picked up?
So the biggest one is murakoze. You
Oh,
know,
Yeah.
perfect.
so we
Yeah.
just that's really the go-to. That's the go-to. You know, that was the first word we learned. I was like, okay, so how do we say thank you? You
Mhm.
know, but that's honestly as far as I got personally. There's a lot of things that you pick up just from the way people are talking. You know, like you can always tell on their face if like they're confused by what you're saying.
Right.
But in my experience, a lot of the people we interacted with knew pretty decent English. And I mean, in some people it was more limited than others. And there were a lot of words or like sayings that I would use that I would just have to say it differently, you
Right.
know?
Mhm.
But other than that, yeah, murakoze was the go-to word.
Thank you for indulging me there. They also, I noticed a lot speak kind of like the Queen's English as well. So there's kind of few words that folks will say, and I'm like, I think I know what that means.
Yeah.
What about you, Kelly? Any words that you picked up?
I'm gonna agree. The most common one was Mirakoze. But even just having it that far, I mean, I had this one experience when we went to the Peace Education Initiative, and I was talking with one of the victim survivors of the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, and we actually became really good friends. Even though there was that language barrier, I feel like we just had this shared sense of like sisterhood between the two of us. And I ended up just like giving her one of my rings as a sign of friendship because I wanted her, yeah, I'm getting choked up a little bit, but I wanted
That's
her to have
amazing.
that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Murakoze. Um, really appreciate that. And so on this portion here, as we kind of get close to closing, I'm going to ask the professors to maybe close their ears a little bit. Um, this is to Mariah and Kelly Rose. Do you have any feedback that you'd give the organizers to? And Mariah, you can get us started here in terms of maybe improving the program or maybe even like adding more collaboration and connection to the education program.
Yeah. So I have thought about this, and it's been an amazing experience. I'll start off with that.
Mhm.
But just a few days longer. Originally, our trip was supposed to be 2 days longer than it originally was. Than it, I mean, than it ended up being. But because something happened with the flights, you know, airlines are crazy right now. We
Yeah.
didn't get those 2 extra days. So everything just from the start began like, okay, so eat, trip, eat,
Yeah.
break, trip, sleep, you know, and then it was like get up at 5 a.m. to start the next day. And so it was like go, 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 go. And then there was, you know, that mixed with the Rwandan sense of time.
Yes.
So it's like so we would be late and then we would be waiting for 2 hours and then we would be on the go, you know. So I would just say just like a little bit more breathing room
Yes.
is all. And then I think there was another thing. Oh, more University of Rwanda students.
Great.
I think the group we had was wonderful, but I think we only had like 6 students in comparison to our 11 or 12. 11. Yeah. So like I feel like a one-on-one type of ratio would be ideal.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mariah. We can always celebrate things, especially moving forward, but it's always amazing to take that step back a little bit and be a little self-critical, right? And say, that was amazing, but how can we make this potentially even better? So it's always a good thought process. And then to the professors, again, thank you so much for not only encouraging and making this program happen and making sure that the resources, the time commitment, all of that is input to make sure that these things happen for what we consider the youth, which is our future, which I'm going to consider myself the youth as long as I can, for taking that time and effort. And I'm sure other ventures are coming in the future as well to make these experiences happen. So truly, truly thank you. And thank you for being with us today.